Hi, I'm Andrew Shovlin. I'm Trackside Engineering Director and I'm here to answer your questions from the Brazilian Grand Prix. On the first safety car, we did a box opposite call to Max because we'd seen in the second stint when we're doing the same thing, they were maybe a little bit quicker than us, but we couldn't really put them under any pressure. And doing an opposite call meant that it opened up some possibility for us to win the race. So we saw Max came in, that meant Lewis was staying out. He inherited the lead of the race on those medium tyres. They were about 30% into their life. So getting to the end of the race wasn't going to be very easy, but on our models, it was okay. The real challenge though would be the restart. And the medium doesn't warm up as quick as the soft tyre, but we were seeing that if we could survive that restart, the rest of the race he'd be just about able to keep him behind. And as I said, this was one of the opportunities that we could have had to win the race, and that was what we were trying to do. With Valtteri, we put him onto the hard tyre on lap 26. And we had in mind here that we might try and do a one-stop race. We knew that that would be very difficult, but if the hard tyre worked well, it wasn't out of the question. And again, we were looking to do something a bit different because at this stage of the race, Valtteri's position was relatively secure. Now, the first few laps of that stint were good. He was showing very, very good pace, but then it started to drop a bit. Now, Valtteri commented that the track had got a bit windier and that was making the car less consistent. But we saw him lose some time, and more importantly, Albon behind was going very well on the medium tyre and he was closing Valtteri down, and in a few laps he would have been within undercut range. So the decision for us here was, should we try and continue with this one stop? Are we actually going to end up worse off? Or do we just bank position, convert back to a 2, take the medium tyre, and then just try and overtake Leclerc on track? And that was why we did it. That was why that stint on the hard was quite short, simply because we didn't want to lose the initiative and let Albon undercut us. We have a number of questions about Valtteri's engine. Well, before we could even see any smoke on the TV, we were monitoring the oil level and we could see that we were losing oil at a relatively slow rate and a rate that we thought might still make the end of the race. When you started to see the smoke, the rate at which the oil was being consumed increased, and eventually the car actually switched itself off. This is a protection mechanism for the power unit. It saw low pressure and then it switched itself off to avoid further damage. Now, that power unit has come back to Brixworth in the UK. They're going to be looking at it today and into the night, and they'll be making an assessment of whether there has actually been any damage and whether or not we will need to take a penalty with Valtteri in Abu Dhabi. There wasn't a problem with Lewis's battery, as in there was no hardware issue, but we had gone to a deploy mode when we started this undercut sequence. So that's on the in-lap. The power unit starts to deploy energy at a rate that's unsustainable, and it did that over the in-lap and then over the out-lap, and the consequence was eventually that you run out of charge and the car will derate. Now, we knew that we had to give it everything to try and be able to make that undercut stick. What we'll do this week, though, is just review whether the way we used that energy was efficient enough, whether we could have done something better to avoid Max being able to overtake us on the line. When we decided to call Lewis in on that final safety car, we'd seen that the Ferraris had collided. One of them was off at turn 4 and reasonably clear of the track. Vettel was making his way round with a puncher. That was dropping a bit of debris, but we thought he would get back to the pits. And at the point the safety car was called, Lewis was at turn 12, so there wasn't long for us to discuss this decision. Now, subsequent to that, Vettel pulled over before he made it back, although he was reasonably clear of the track, but Stroll unfortunately got taken out by debris from Vettel. So this meant that the safety car period was longer than we might have got away with. But regardless of that, we've looked at the situation. It was a real gamble. Probably in the best case scenario, we'd have made it back to where we started in P2. And on reflection, it wasn't a good call. So were we doing the race again? That's the single decision that we would really like to change. There was damage to Lewis's wing. It was the front left end plate was quite badly damaged. But this wouldn't have added any drag to the car, so it wouldn't have really affected his ability to close in on Gasly up the hill. It was more that you lose front downforce, and that made it more difficult for him to turn the car, especially turning it at turn 12, and that would have set him back a bit. So it wasn't a huge amount of damage, but enough to be significant in this instance. Thank you very much for all of your questions. We will be back in 2 weeks' time to answer more of them. from the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix.